Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for taking a little time to talk about our earliest days here at TMCC. I'm so excited for this. Originally, we were thinking of a panel discussion, but this is going to be even better. So I'm Kate Kirkpatrick. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications. And with me today doing most of the storytelling will be Pat Slavin, TMCC Emeritus Faculty, and Cameron Carr from the Elizabeth Sturm Library. He is our TMCC archivist. And while I am making acknowledgements, I want to give a big thanks to Tim Ill, our videographer, who dug up a bunch of video interviews from our video archives that we're going to share with you today. I think they're going to knock your socks off. So we're going to be sharing lots of stories. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. I'll be watching that, or to send me an email. I'll watch that too. And we'll get them worked in. But we do have a pretty heavy storytelling that we're going to be doing today. So let us know if you have a question that we didn't cover. So to get us started, let's take a step back in time to the year 1971, a time when the Dow Jones Industrial Average had yet to break 1,000, when the voting age in the United States was lowered from 21 to 18. When a down-home coffee shop and lounge called the Pepper Mill had just opened in Reno, and when a gallon of gasoline was 36 cents. This is the time when our community was opening its doors to a brand new college. So today we're going to paint a picture of what life was like then, as the foundation of our college was being laid. And we'll introduce you to many of those early employees who helped shape our institution and talk about some of their early milestones and the challenges they faced. And boy, they had quite a few. Throughout it all, though, you'll see a developing theme of focusing on students that continues to this day. Cameron's got a little intro for us to kick us off.
Here we go.
Thank you, Kate and Cameron, for setting the stage so beautifully. So let's talk about what college looked like in those days. And I thought we'd start with talk about the structure of the college, which I thought was something unique. So in fall of 1971, we had 3 community colleges, but we had only one president. That president oversaw all 3 of those colleges, but he had representation and leadership in the form of a vice president for each of those campuses, colleges. In the case of Western Nevada Community College, it was Dr. Jack Davis. He was located in Carson City. Although Dr. Charles Donnelly was overseeing all 3 of those community colleges, he was physically located in Reno in some offices down on Marsh Avenue. He answered to the Board of Regents and played a pretty important role. I hope we can describe this accurately for you, because he really did help lay the foundation of the future of the community college. We have a little short video for you to start things off with. Joey Arby, who you probably know as the person who was responsible for having athletics early on in the college, but he also had many, many other roles. Charles Donnelly had a very important role, not just in all of the strategies that he employed, but in his emphasis on focus of the students. And Joe was going to tell us just a little bit about that.
Dr. Charles Donnelly was hired by the Board of Regents to start this community college. And he was so sure everything's going to work. We got students out there that need help. He said, this, that, and the other. And we had a dinner at a house one time, and he just bounded on it. He says, what was left of our staff and that working there. And he says, you've got to take care of every student. Don't turn anybody away. Do what you can to keep.
So I think the message was pretty clear early on, and it looks like it's carried through well over the next 50 years. One of the things that Charles Donnelly did, though, that I think is the greatest gifts that our college has received, was he worked with Marvin Piccolo, who was the superintendent of the school district at that time. Now, in Reno Sparks, we had something called adult education, which was run by the school district. And the two of them got together and talked about ways that they could work jointly. That's refreshing, isn't it? All of the people who were working for the school district were ultimately became part of the community college. And what they did was they planned this partnership and made it work. So basically what happened was we were sitting pretty. We had students who were already in place. We were allowed to use the school district's facilities in the evening. And we have a clip from somebody named George Tavernia that some of you may know, who early on was in charge of all the outlying centers, which was pretty challenging since we had 8 counties that we were in charge of. He talks a little bit about this partnership with the school district and the community college. Cameron?
Chuck Donnelly and Marv Piccolo, who was the superintendent of schools, had worked together on this, and the only thing they could see was take our group who were involved with outside activities in the evening and development of programs and everything, and assimilate us as best they could into the operation of the community college system. We still were employees of Washoe County, but nominally we were also de facto employees of the University of Nevada system in working at that time Western Nevada Community College to get it off the ground. It was a pretty interesting time for most of us.
It was an interesting time and probably somewhat confusing also, because we had employees who were working for both entities, to the point where in order to make it legal and as clear as possible for the people who were working in those circumstances, they had contracts with both agencies. And so someone might have their salary paid for by the school district, and the community college would have them under contract for $1. And so many employees had 2 contracts in order to be able to function, I guess you would say, legally. A great strategy. We hit the ground running. A big advantage over the rest of the community college area. And I think that we felt right away that we were sitting in the, sitting pretty in moving forward. We had students, we had facilities, and we also had a partnership with the Nevada Technical Institute, which was in existence at that time. They ran a lot of occupational programs, and they were willing to turn some of those programs over to us. And Cameron has some great insights on that particular agency that I hope he can share with us.
Sure. So first of all, yeah, the cooperation between Washoe and Western Nevada brought a huge influx of students into our college. which was huge for us. We had just started, we were trying to get off the ground, and this was, a big shot in the arm for morale. We actually had students wanting to take these courses. Here is a flyer from that first year, fall of '73. And I love how it's never too late to learn was kind of their mantra. Adding to that, John Caserta was affiliated with the college, and he was big into the adult education program. He started what was called the Night Owl College. He had an idea that a lot of folks that were working full time would want to come to school at night to maybe take occupational programs. It's funny though, they were surprised when psychology ended up being the #1 selected course during those night classes. Another thing that came about from the influx of students, there was a huge need for instructors. So part-time faculty really became necessary for the college to function. There really wasn't any, it was kind of a freewheeling time, I guess you'd say, because there wasn't a lot of structure to any of this, but they would teach what the students wanted, or they would have classes based on what the instructors knew. And it was just kind of it was a wild time. And as long as they were getting students in the seats, that was really the most important thing associated with everything. Next thing I want to share before we move into our next segment is Pat had touched on the Nevada Technical Institute. So a little background with that is in the late 1960s, UNR purchased the land out at Stead and able to house the new Nevada Technical Institute, which was an adjunct campus of the main UNR campus on Virginia Street. As Pat said, this campus housed a lot of the occupational programs, nursing, X-ray tech. So really all that, it really just kind of flowed in nicely with what we were trying to accomplish with our curriculum. And so when we talk about this next part about moving to Stead wasn't just chosen out of thin air. The infrastructure was in place, and we were ready to take on that challenge of really fulfilling that space and serving those students that would be in that space. And then Pat, Kate.
Well, I think that was a perfect transition. Pat, why don't you tell us what it was like for students and staff to be at that Stead campus? What was it like there?
It was very interesting, as you might suspect. And although we had quite a few faculty out there right away, most of the administrative and support staff were still housed at Reno High School, where the adult education offices were officially located. But gradually over the first couple of years, we got everybody moved out there. So it became kind of this little, I guess you would say, community of its own. We had, the old Air Force buildings. We had several buildings, offices. We had classrooms. We had a gym. I guess you could say it was the early Joe's gym, where we did have our basketball team. Also had a branch of the Washoe County Library right next to one of our buildings. So we really had a lot of resources available to us in getting going. And I have to say the Stead Air Force Base kind of became the hub initially of the north part of Western Nevada College. We have another little video for you of some of the people who worked here in the early days. Debbie Dick Weber, who was the first classified employee. We have Dolores Middlebrooks, who was a nursing faculty, and we have George Tavernier again, talking about those early days in that SIG. Cameron?
Oh, early days, like Joe did everything. Started out with Joe. There were 3 of us at Stead, and then, 1972, when we were really, really wound up, I worked for Student Services, registering, helping, support the counselors and just getting kids into their classes. It was just a gang of us, very small gang, as you know, that worked for all these kids and all these departments. And it was like there were really no lines delineating what anybody did, because everybody did everything.
We were kind of just inventing ourselves as it went along. As I recall, none of us had ever attended a community college. It was a whole new concept in the state. And here we were as part of an education system with the school district. We were doing a lot of that, but we still did a lot of inventing as we went along. There was a lot of planning, plenty of talk, plenty of times when you wondered if you really were doing the right thing. It was great.
I came to in August of 1973 because the nursing program had gone far enough that they were needed, they were going to have another class. And the group that was here was ready for second year, and they were ready to start another class at first year. So they had to add more faculty. The fact that we had the facilities at Stead probably moved us faster a little bit than Carson City, because they had to build a building and had to do some things that, because we could use the old Air Force facility. I know for the nursing program, we moved into the old hospital and just, the room was set up and all that kind of stuff for us.
So we do have another quote from an employee that we don't have on video, so I'm just going to read this one for you because it's just an interesting reflection on Stead from Emeritus faculty member Joanne Dane, who said regarding her memories of Stead, "I remember the wind in the trees at night, the owls hooting, and the sound of the Indian students playing their drums. I remember the air races and folks climbing to the top of the barracks, then dorms, to watch them. And of course, I remember with great fondness the first faculty. We took a chance on a new institution in Nevada and helped build a new kind of college, one for the community." And so as you're hearing throughout all our interviews, there's that common theme of service to students and doing what needs to be done and never turning a student away, making sure that they had a home at WNCC. We do have a couple of questions, and I know before we move on, this would probably be the best time to answer those. So the first one was, what did it mean that on the brochure from 1973 that everything at the Stead campus was at 100% discount from the state? Cameron, do you happen to know that answer off the top of your head?
I don't, something I could certainly research to find more. If I had to guess though, it would be that in order to make this collaboration work, there were some incentives that were given to the college just to kind of get it going. But it's certainly something I will look into 100%.
And the next question was, what was the total student enrollment at the start? How many faculty members, and was it diverse?
Let's see. So off the top of my head, I know that first year, the total enrollment jumped from less than 100 FTE to then close to 750 FTE. As far as the makeup of students, I'm not exactly sure what the breakdown would be. But I do know there was a mix of, young students, adult students that had families. And then there was a lot of veterans that were returning from the war at that time too, that were looking for a path. And so the community college really fit their needs and filled a gap for them, I believe.
I agree. And I think also, Cameron, you told me that the first graduating class was 29 students, and we were proud
Yes.
of those 29 students.
Yeah. Spring of 72, that would have been that first class that graduated. The ceremony was held at Pioneer Theater. And yeah, 29. So we've certainly grown since then.
Well, Pat, now seems like the perfect opportunity for you to tell us about some of those challenges that you faced in those early years.
Okay, I'll do my best. And because I spent most of my time in those early years in the admissions and records office, I thought I would kind of focus on that. I think the challenges were, as George reflected early on, we're just kind of trying to figure it out. And you know, those day-to-day operations are the things that kind of get you scratching your head and thinking, okay, how can we do this? And how can we improve upon whatever it is that we're doing? So as you might suspect, admissions, we had an admissions and records office, and registration was one of our functions. Took up a lot of time. We did not have all of the technology available to us that we have today. As a matter of fact, registration consisted of filling out an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, one-sided, had name, address, phone number. I think we asked for social security number because we used that as an identifier in the early years before we were told that was not appropriate. It asked probably a question about how long you had been in Nevada. In those days, to be considered a resident, you had to have lived here for 6 months. And unless you had filled that portion out that made it look questionable or close to the limit, you didn't have to fill out anything else. If you said, I've been here 2 years, you're good to go. It had a place for you to put what class you wanted to take, and that was it. You took that and went and paid for the class. Those forms were bundled up and taken to our key punch operator, who punched all cards for them the next day. Those cards were transported to the computing center. And the next day, the computing center would present us with this beautiful gift of a computer printout. Boy, we were slick. We were so proud of ourselves when we had that. So in the early days, we I don't recall registering at STED. It seems to me that our sense was we needed to be registering in town where the access for people was easier. In case anybody ever asks you on a Trivial Pursuit question where the first registration was in the North, it was at the Pioneer Theater Auditorium, fall of 1971. But I recall registering at Reno High School. And remember, we had access to the school district's facilities. And Reno High School was still housing a lot of the adult education administrators. So they paved the way for us to go there. But we couldn't start registering until after the students were gone. So we would go into this space, set up tables, bring in cash register, bring in our computer printouts, and set up for registration in the late afternoon and early evening. Then we'd take all of our stuff and kind of disassemble the registration area. Rather than having to cart it back to STED, we were allowed storage space there, so that the next day when we came back to do it all again, we just were able to move it out from the storage area into the registration area. Worked pretty well and served us well for the time. One of the things that was important to us was to be able to register for longer than 4 to 8 in the evening. And because we were always looking for places to register, one of the most infamous places was the National Guard Armory. It was a huge space. We were allowed to set up there and leave it there for like a week. We were really excited about being able to start registration at 8 or 9 in the morning. And of course, we went probably until 8 at night, and any stragglers that were around we took care of. So we were probably up by 9. We had set up ahead of time, but I remember coming to work the first day of registration. It's probably, you know, a little before 8, and got out of my car, and there were all kinds of cars in the parking lot, and there was a long, long line of students. Little panicked, went inside. Everybody's going, did you see that line out there? So it was a surprise for us that many students would come. We were overwhelmed, but we just, you know, jumped in and started getting the students in as quickly as we could, took care of them, but the line was there all day long. And those people, God bless them, stood in that line in the hot August sun for sometimes a couple of hours before they could get into the building. So poor Charles Donnelly, president of all of this, was on the front page of the newspaper the next morning saying, you know, what happened here? And he's having to apologize for the fact that we were probably not prepared for these big numbers, that we were a little overwhelmed, and that we would do better next time. Thank you for bearing with us. So all of us knew this was one of those moments where, you know, we were going to have to really roll up our shirt sleeves and find a way to make this a smoother operation. So we're feeling terrible that, you know, this had been so clunky. But at the same time, we looked at how many students were wanting to be there. And I think we also had this sense that, you know, maybe we arrived. This is a red letter day. We are doing something that people are really appreciating and wanting. So that part was good. Now, remember that the community college at that time was in charge, the Western Nevada Community College was in charge of 8 counties. So we had to register those students too. I'm pretty sure Carson City was doing their own registration, and I want to say that Fallon was also. They were a decent size, probably were able to take care of themselves. But, you know, we had classes in Fernley and in Lovelock and in Gardnerville and Incline Village and Hawthorne. And so we needed to find a way to get those people into their classes also. So our process was at 5 o'clock in the evening, a staff member from admissions and records and a staff member from finance would get in the car and drive to one of those locations. And we would take our little box of forms and pens and pencils and, you know, something to carry the money in. It could have been a money bag, or it could have been a cookie tin for all I know. And we had, of course, our infallible computer printouts. So we throw all of that into a car, head out to one of these locations. And sometimes we also took books, textbooks, if in fact we knew that classes needed a certain textbook. We would often bring those and sell them to the students. So we would head out, do the registration. It was kind of heartwarming to go to some of these places, like we'd drive the 2 hours to Hawthorne, get set up, and as we're walking in the doors, bringing our boxes of goodies, you know, we were greeted so warmly, and, you know, they just embraced us and what we represented for them in being able to get them into these classes. So it was, you know, if we were a little bedraggled by the end of, you know, having done registration all day and then walked into one of these, you know, drove out, walked into one of these outlying centers, we were so received so kindly that it was the best shot in the arm a person could have, you know. So we would register the students, take everything back. The same process would follow. We take the forms to the key punch operator, would punch the forms, get them to the computer center. So it's that same process in a smaller way, because there were, you know, we'd have a handful of forms. I was asked to tell the story about one of the registrations. I call it probably the least cost-effective registration we ever had. But we had like an EMT class going on in Lovelock, and there were veterans in the class. So if they registered, they would get some kind of veterans benefits. So we were asked to go out there. So Joyce Belcher from the finance office and I got in the car at 5 o'clock, drove out to Lovelock, went to Pershing High School where they said the class was, got there, no class. We contacted we found a maintenance person there. I love small towns. This was, one of those things. He said, well, let me call the principal of the school. So he called the principal at home, who said, oh, we moved to that class to, the fire station. So we got in the car, drove to the fire station, get there, and the instructor says, I'm sorry, we're taking a test right now, you'll have to wait. So Joyce and I, twiddled our thumbs and waited until they were done, and then said who we were, why we were there, to register anybody who wanted credit for the class, and would handle any paperwork that they needed for any kind of benefits. And nobody wanted to sign up. So we stood there as kind of a little befuddled, a little embarrassed, and somewhat amused at the fact that we had spent all evening getting to Lovelock and no one registered. I say that it's the most least cost-effective registration we ever had, because we didn't register anybody, but they had to pay us overtime. Both of us were classified, so we got overtime. We got per diem for dinner, and I got gas for my car because I had to use a personal vehicle. So it cost them a little bit of money to get no registrations, which was one of the kind of interesting things that happened.
I love that story, Pat.
Yeah.
I think now is a good time for Cameron to maybe show us some of that class schedule, and let's look at what some of those early classes were like, because some of the topics may surprise our audience.
I think so.
Absolutely. So before I get into it too much, in my opinion, this is one of the most important documents that we have in our archives. It's how it all started. And so I'd like you guys to think back 50 years ago when we were trying to get off the ground, and imagine the students that may have picked this up or received it in their mailbox and thought, you know what, I'm going to take a chance on this, and I'm going to try to pursue something beyond myself. A lot of our students may not have fit the university model. But these were students that were really hungry for higher education, and they wanted something else. They wanted something more. They wanted to better themselves in their lives. And so I just think it's such an amazing start to all of this. When we get in, one funny thing, registration was $10 a credit, which is quite affordable compared to what today's are. And then we get into some of these courses, a lot of occupational courses, a lot of, I'd say, your standard core curriculum, history, political science, psychology, sociology. Then you have business ed, business tech, fire science, English, math. It was really an amazing time. And that kind of touches back to, we tried to teach what the students wanted to take, and we would create classes based upon what the instructors were well-versed in. I also like thinking to the instructors that would be teaching these classes and how they were taking a chance on something that was untested, and they really didn't know if it would work or not. But they gave it what they could. And, as the theme has gone, it's, don't turn the students away, do whatever it takes to help them succeed. In some of these classes, there's the adult students that might have worked a 9 to 5, but then you know what? They're going to come sign up for principles of sociology from 6 to 7 at night, just to try to dig deep and better themselves. And I think that's so great. And I think it's really touches on still what we try to achieve today for our students today.
Thanks, Cameron. So now we're going to move a little bit into the later part of the decade, and we're going to talk about why did we split from WNCC? How did that work? And how did the name change work? Because there are some really interesting stories about how the name changed and what everybody wanted to name the school. So Pat?
Yes, let me give a little background first, because when we talk about the split, we actually kind of had two splits. And the first one was in like 76. We had now our own campus. That was a big moment for us. There was a sense of real belonging, like we really arrived. We had left Stead and we're here on, wasn't called Dandini then, but we were up here in the miniaturized version of the Red Mountain building. It was quite small then, but we were here and it was ours. And as we had that, and Carson had their own campus, we started to develop this sense of autonomy, and we're being more and more taking care of our own, I guess you would say, in the North. And Carson was doing more and more on their own. And so there was this sense of, although we were always very supportive of each other and sharing resources and sharing staff for different things, we were becoming our own. And so there's a clip from Pat Miltenberger, who was the Dean of Students, and she talks about how this was developing. The first, well, probably both splits were the same, but the first split and the sense of both of the leaderships in those areas and how that came about. So let's take a look at that.
Jack's focus was the rural counties, and so and then Jim's focus was, of course, Washoe County, the larger urban area, and Jim's, was very strong on occupational education and its importance in economic development, because he was closely connected to the political environment with Laxalt and others. So he understood we had to move our state forward and have an educated and skilled workforce. And so, whereas Jack's emphasis was on these rural counties. So when the split came, it made sense, because, we were being torn time-wise between how to get all those services out to the rural counties and serve this large group of people that were in Washoe County. Because Jim had brought us a couple thousand registrations, the vets are coming back, and we're certifying, I think at some point we were over 1,000 vets. And so here we are growing rapidly, and then we've got we've got 30 people in Hawthorne. How do you divide your time? And so it made sense when it split that one college would emphasize the outreach and rural and service to the rural communities and their economic development, which would be unique and distinct from the urban area. And that's what eventually led to the split.
I do apologize. I should have clarified up front that when Pat is referring to Jack, she is talking about Jack Davis in Carson City. And when she's referring to Jim, she is talking about Jim Erdley, who was running all the operations in the North. Cameron, you had some great insights on that split also.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. What you were showing me while they were talking.
Yeah, so as Pat mentioned in the video, it was really philosophical. Jim had a vision for his college. Jack had a vision for his college, and they would, sometimes butt heads on what the best way to approach all this was. As far as, sorry, got sidetracked. Anyway, as far as that initial split of creating Western North and Western South, in 1976, Charles Donnelly took that proposal to the Board of Regents. His proposal stated that this is going to streamline a lot of our issues. It's going to make it more efficient, and it's going to be better for the students. That's how he presented it. In April of 1976, that proposal was accepted by the Board of Regents to split Western Nevada College into Western Nevada North and Western Nevada South, effective July 1st, 1976. So really, as we lead into the next part of our story, the groundwork had been set for us to break off as our own entity eventually anyway, several years before it actually happened. And actually, I guess I could go ahead and jump into that. I've got some other docs about that. So as far as the split goes, there became, apologize. Okay, there we go. So as far as that first split goes, in 1976, after a few years of being Western Nevada North and Western Nevada South, momentum really started to gain that, the North Campus needed to be its own entity. We were serving a different population of students. We had our own leadership. We had our own staff. We needed to be on our own. So in September 1979, again, the regents were approached to say, the time has come where we need to completely separate not just the campuses, but Reno needs its own college and Carson will have its own college. We have outgrown this concept. It's time for a split. So the regents asked that question to be posed to faculty, staff, students at both campuses as far as the feasibility of such a thing would go. And then what they thought of it. And, really it was overwhelming that yes, we want to be our own entity. Reno will be its own campus and its own college altogether. So when that was decided, there was a lot of work that needed to be done. One of those items being, how do we choose a name? There were surveys that were sent out to students, as you can see on the screen now. Some of the names that they submitted, in addition to Truckee Meadows Community College, were Reno Sparks Community College, Mountain Sage, Washoe County, High Sierra, Silver State, College of the Foothills. All great names. It's another interesting story is the advisory board that oversaw the colleges. One of their members recommended that Carson rename themselves Central Nevada Community College, and Washoe County, we would retain the name Western Nevada Community College. However, the advisory committee unanimously voted to separate the two colleges. So it was going to happen at this point. So this is one of my favorite parts of the story. In addition to those names that the students submitted for a proposal for the new name of our college in Reno, staff and faculty were also able to submit some of their ideas. So as we see here, there's a wide range of possible names from Reno Sparks to Washoe to Sierra Nevada, Cosmopolitan Community College, Sun Valley Community College, Paul Laxalt College, Howard Hughes College, College of the Pines, Mount Rose Community College, Harvard Community College, Harvard of the Truckee Meadows, Fremont, Bridger. You get the idea. There was such a wide range of names, but eventually it got whittled down to a couple of different choices. This document that you see here, this is the only document that I'm aware of that has the letterhead Reno Sparks Community College. And the rumor is that Jim Erdley, he favored that name tremendously over Truckee Meadows Community College. So in a sense, I think he may have been kind of trying to nudge folks to submit their vote to choose Reno Sparks Community College over Truckee Meadows. Because as it says in the document, at this moment, the final results have not been compiled. However, he took the liberty of making it known what his choice for that college was. So now we do have another video that has some firsthand accounts of kind of how all that happened. And okay, here we go.
Is when we changed the name.
Oh, yeah.
When it became obvious, and you can tell, because maybe you can remember some of the rest of them, because I can't, but there were names suggested. And I know that several of them did not have the word Truckee or did not have Reno Sparks in the name.
Like Silver State was one.
Yeah.
Reno Sparks was the name Jim favored.
Is that what it
Yeah,
was? Okay.
yeah. And then I think Lakes Crossing came up because that's, was the old name of,
Right.
and then the valley, of course, Truckee Meadows. And yeah, I can't remember how many elections he had, but we had a runoff election, yeah, of the first set of names.
And if you remember, we had some kind of dinner out at the Nugget. Well, we went to go into dinner, and here was this sign. And one sign said Truckee Meadows, and one said Reno Sparks. And you were to pick it by which side you went in to go into the dining room.
I have totally forgotten that part.
I didn't know.
Do you remember doing that? Oh, I've always chuckled about that because here was this sign.
This democratic way
Yeah,
of doing things.
yeah.
And Jim was worried about the identity issue because no one would know where Truckee Meadows was. But the students liked Truckee Meadows. And so Jim, I think he had an extra election trying to win again.
Let's try one more time.
Yeah, and we were using student government at the time to sort of get a feel for it. And the faculty were involved, but as I recall, the students had more say. And that would make sense with Jim.
It would.
And so they kept electing Truckee Meadows, and Jim just gave up finally. And he just would, he'd go, no one's going to know where we are.
But at that time, nobody else had Truckee Meadows. Within that first year, the hospital that's now West Hills opened as Truckee Meadows Hospital. There were 2 or 3 other businesses that they named their businesses Truckee Meadows, and it really kind of angered me.
We were the
Yeah.
trendsetters.
Yes,
Yeah,
but I thought that was supposed to be ours and our identity,
And so we became Truckee Meadows Community College in December of 1979. Jim Eardley was named the first president. And although the idea of serving students was well ingrained within all faculty and staff during that first decade, it does help to have a leader who constantly provides an environment where that philosophy can flourish. And that's the kind of leader our first president was. And he was ready to take us into the next decade. The foundation was well laid, and we know that it's been carried forward all these years later. So here's our last video clip. Talks a little bit about who that Jim Eardley fellow was.
The number one thing with Jim Eardley always has been the students.
And I know you've heard this, it's a cliche practically when talking about Jim Eardley, but he always asked 2 things. One, how will this benefit students, or how will this affect students? Always asked that. And then he usually said, what do the faculty think about it?
And I think much of what TMCC is today grows out of Jim Eardley. I think his sort of incredible student responsiveness, which everyone talks about, but it's bigger than that. He built a culture. And the culture is you do the right thing for people.
Student success was our mission. I mean, we all knew what the mission statement was. Student success was it, and that was it.
All right, so to kind of go along with that video, there we were in 1979. We chose the name Truckee Meadows Community College, and we were about to embark on a new journey as our own entity. Joey Arby, who you heard from in the first video, he summed it up in 1976 by saying, "It's obvious we're serving a purpose. The steady increases in enrollment support that. Our best advertisement is from student word of mouth. It's going to be a big school." there are nothing but good things in sight for this school. And honestly, I mean, to me, truer words have never been spoken. What he said is true today. And the last thing I'd like to add is, you know, if you think about it today, our college has grown into, you know, a mighty oak, let's say. The branches stretch all across Reno Sparks. We have a strong core with our mission and our values. And the roots, man, the roots run deep through this community. Generations of people have got an education with us. And so I think we all need to be proud of what we are a part of and what we can continue to do to support our students, and not forget the folks that tended to that little sapling in 1971 by nurturing it and helping it grow into what we have today. So I'm proud to be a part of all of this, and we all should be.
Thanks, Cameron. That sums it up just perfectly. So that's the end of our prepared stories for us. So I want to thank Patricia, Cameron, and Tim for all the help on all of this stuff. We're absolutely open for questions. I did get one from Frank, who wondered if anybody knows where Bill Baines is now. Does anybody know where Bill is?
I know that he did have, he and his wife had a place in Idaho that they used to go to fairly frequently. He did show up for what we called the Steadies reunion, but that was 2015. My, how the years fly by.
Who are the Steadies?
Yes.
You need to tell us who the Steadies are.
I will. They are a wonderful group of people. They're the people who worked during the first decade of the community college. They are, if they were here before, while we were still out at Stead, or before we actually changed our name to Truckee Meadows, we call them Steadies because more than likely they had some time that they spent at Stead. There's our student services picture of, you know, who that group was, plus a lot more. This was a student services picture, but the, you know, there were faculty, we probably, I'm trying to think of how many people. We probably had about 60 people up for the Steadies reunion. And Bill was there. And but I know that he did spend a lot of time in Idaho. He had a place there. So he's probably fishing. We'll have to track him down, tell him somebody's been looking.
Can I mention something?
Absolutely.
Yes, I happened to work with him at University of New Mexico, Gallup. Okay, I was there from 2013 till 2015, December of 2000. So he joined the staff, I believe it was in 2015. So I was there with him as a colleague for about a year, and I left to Great Basin College. So when I saw him, I was just amazed to see him be part of TMCC, which I just joined as a new faculty. I'm just so glad to.
It's a small world, isn't it?
He still might be still there. He might be still there. I cannot, but he was there anyway when I left. And I haven't gotten the chance to contact him since.
That's great. All right, we have a couple more minutes. Any other questions?
I just, John in the library, I just think it's fascinating. We didn't quite have a fixed address. It said Sparks. Yeah, El Rancho. It's like El Rancho. Wait a minute. I thought this is Dandini.
Yes.
Interesting piece too.
So I can give a little insight on that. So it's kind of funny. Early documents also have the address as 7000 Sullivan Lane. It's like there was some confusion as to where Sullivan ended and where El Rancho began. But then in 1977, the Regents dedicated this entire area. So our campus and DRI, they designated it the Dandini Research Park. So Alessandro Dandini, he was responsible for getting the land that our campus currently sits on. That's another full story that we can tell another time. But he was really tied into UNR and DRI. And then in 1982, that's when it was finally decided that El Rancho, I guess, right at the cut of Sun Valley there, would be renamed Dandini Boulevard. So yeah, the early days, it was still El Rancho, but from 1982 on, that's been Dandini.
And also in the early days of the college, there was only access to the campus from the bottom of the hill. The road did not go through all the way to the freeway. So our access was to go down or up that hill, which, as you know, in the winter time, is not the most fun thing in the world. So most of us really love the idea that they cut that road all the way through to the freeway.
Right, I don't have any other questions anywhere. So I just wanted to end by giving a plug for our future events. We intend for this to be the first of 3 events throughout the course of this year. And so the next ones, we are going to ambitiously try and tackle 20 years in each event, but there was just so much to report on our first decade that we chose just 10 for this. So we don't have dates for those yet, so please watch for more information. And we're going to be having a big TMCC birthday party for faculty, staff, students, and our TMCC community Tuesday, September 21st. So mark your calendar and join us for that too. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. This has been a treat to share stories. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Cameron. And we'll see you another time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you all. Have a great day.